Good morning, everyone. My name is Conor Quinlan from the EPA Climate Services team. I'd like to welcome you to this event today, which we hope will be very interesting and thought-provoking and a very enjoyable day on what is certainly a very topical issue. So, without further ado, thank you, and I would like to invite Laura Burke, Director General of the Environmental Protection Agency, now to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, and delighted to be here, in this beautiful venue. And of course, this is the EPA's annual climate change conference. Today we're holding the conference in the hybrid format in this kind of post-COVID world. So it's great that so many people are here today, but also that we're able to facilitate people joining us in online as well. And in fact, we have over 900 people registered between the in-person and the virtual. So a huge level of interest in the conference, in the topic. It's a very topical topic, of course. Climate change on the ground, land use change and forestry. And I think it's something that will be gaining in interest and relevance in the coming months and years ahead. And of course, as well, I'm sure the huge level of interest is because of the excellent speakers that we have, both national and, of course, international. But when I look back at the year gone by, there's been so many milestones since we last met. 2022 was the warmest year in Ireland since records began, the hottest summer ever experienced in Europe, and globally, the 5th warmest year in a series stretching back to 1850. Last week, we heard from the World Meteorological Organization that one of the next 5 years is highly likely to be the hottest of modern records, as climate change poses an increasing threat to both humans and nature. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Service reported that in 2022, greenhouse gases continued to rise, reporting the highest concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane from the satellite record, and by including other records, the highest levels for over 2 million years for carbon dioxide and over 800,000 years for methane. Earlier this year, the IPCC published its synthesis report. The findings are clear, stark, and challenging. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. Human-caused climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in regions right across the globe. And continued greenhouse gas emissions will lead to increased warming, with the best estimates indicating that we will reach the increase of 1.5 degrees in the near term. And every increment of global warming will intensify multiple and concurrent hazards. So all of these messages reinforce the urgent need for action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while adapting to current and future impacts of climate change. The European Green Deal commits us to deliver net zero greenhouse gas emissions at an EU level by 2050. Nationally, Ireland is committed to a 51% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and to achieving net zero emissions no later than 2050. So very much in line with the EU targets as well. And of course, in Ireland, we now have legally binding requirements set out in legislation. And since we last met also, we saw sectoral emission ceilings put in place for all sectors except the land use change and forestry sector. And these are to support the achievement of the first set of national carbon budgets. And the sectoral ceiling for LULUCF sector is expected to be finalised by the end of this year. And with all of these things, then you look at the EPA's inventories for greenhouse gas emissions. And for 2021, we saw a 4.7% increase in greenhouse gas emissions relative to 2020, and an over 1% increase in emissions relative to the pre-COVID restriction levels. So transformational emission reductions are needed across energy, transport, agriculture, and land use to meet our national and international commitments by 2030 and further out to 2050. Energy demand reduction and the replacement of fossil fuels with clean energy is necessary, but carbon removals from the atmosphere are also required. And we're delighted to have Jim Skee with us today, our keynote speaker, and he's going to be talking to us shortly. But Jim has highlighted previously that global agriculture, forestry, and other types of land use account for 23% of human greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, natural land processes absorb carbon dioxide equivalent to almost a third of carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels and industry. In Ireland, the LULUCF sector, comprising of forest land, cropland, grassland, wetlands, settlements and other lands, as well as harvested wood products, account for 11% of our total emissions, so a very significant sector. And this sector is a net source of emissions right back since 1990. Alexander Popp of the Potsdam Institute captured it really well when he wrote that land is not only where we live, land is also where we live from. We draw our food and fibre, timber and bioenergy from land, a host of everyday services that we take for granted, though it's literally our life support system. Land is one of the major foundations of human well-being, and we've been using it for innumerable generations past. But misusing it could prove fatal for generations to come. The continued negative trends seen across Ireland's greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions, our water quality, our biodiversity indicators, highlight the importance of how we use our land and how we must move to work to protect and restore this life support system. And those of you who've been here before will have heard me highlight that as a nation, we have a clear cultural, social, and economic interdependency on land and agriculture. This transcends our country's history and has shaped and changed our land and past and current land use. We came late by international standards to industrialization and urbanization, and as a society, we maintain our affinity and connection with the land. Many of us, if we're not directly from rural and farming backgrounds, our parents or grandparents are from those types of backgrounds. So we do have a really strong connection with the land in Ireland. Our land and agriculture sector is a valuable national asset to provide secure food supply and economic resources, supporting rural communities and national economic growth. And as we saw, particularly during the recent pandemics and lockdown, the local environment, the lands, the rural environment was seen as a place of solitude and well-being. And as we look towards a carbon neutral future, we see that it will play a key role in delivering clean energy, opportunities for more sustainable bioeconomy, and in the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And today our focus is on land use in the context of climate change and its role in the climate system. There are high levels of ambition for the use of land, both at an EU as well as a national level, including the role of land as a carbon sink, as an opportunity for agricultural diversification, actions such as re-wetting, afforestation, increased organics, increased tillage, are all referenced across different plans and strategies, whether that be the Climate Action Plan, Food Vision, or the proposed Nature Restoration Law. And of course, we also have the findings of the recent Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity, which are relevant here as well. But there is a real need now to understand the impacts and implications of all of these plans and strategies and how they're going to work together in the context of land. And as with all climate change responses, the discussion on Ireland's land use future must be based on the best available science. It should be inclusive. We need to avoid polarisation, recognising that change is difficult and that we are in uncharted territory. We don't have all the answers, but it's important that we work to understand the challenges so that we can overcome them together. In this regard, there's much work underway in Ireland to inform our understanding of land and how we currently use and can use it in the context of our changing climate, both in terms of mitigation but also in adaptation. The EPA, as many of you will be well aware, has long supported research in these areas, our 2023 research call, which closes for applications next week, so get your applications in. The call includes climate science, climate adaptation, and land use as important areas where we want to fund future research. We're inviting proposals from the research community for innovative research projects to support the development and implementation of climate and land use policies in Ireland, specifically recognising that scientific research and innovation are playing an increasingly important role in informing how governments and society can respond to the challenges posed by climate change. And such work includes the Land Use Review. Phase 1 of the Land Use Review recently concluded, and it provides the evidence base to determine the environmental, ecologic and economic characteristics of land types right across Ireland. And of course, this will inform Phase 2 of the process, which is due to commence shortly. It's vital that we move forward by clearly understanding all stakeholders' perspectives and concerns in a spirit of constructive and mutual respect. And this is very much the framing of today's discussions as well. And of course, initiatives such as the National Dialogue on Climate Action, including the EPA's Climate Change in the Irish Mind study, are really important in understanding and facilitating this conversation and development of mutual understanding. So over the course of today, we're going to hear from experts to discuss the research and actions necessary and underway to reduce emissions and develop our peatlands, forests, agriculture lands and soils as carbon sinks, and realise the co-benefits for water, air quality and biodiversity, as well as the societal, practical and technical concerns that need to be discussed and addressed as we face this transition. This morning, we're in the zone of setting the scene. What is the current global and national context with regard to climate action and LULUCF? Our second session, Land and Climate Science, will focus on developments in our understanding of how land use is contributing to climate change and how land use is also an important part of the solution to address climate change. Our third and final session, Land Use, Society, Food Systems and Multiple Benefits, will examine climate action and land use and implications and interactions with the agri-food sector, farmers, and how land use climate action can also deliver multiple co-benefits. So it looks like a really interesting, informative day, but also it's a great opportunity for those of us who are in the room to, I suppose, reconnect and engage. So I would encourage really active discussion, engagement during all of these sessions, but also over coffee, over lunch, talk to people, meet people you don't normally talk to, because all of that helps in growing the understanding of this important topic. So with that, I'm absolutely delighted that the Minister is joining us here this morning, and I might ask Minister Eamon Ryan to give us a few words at the beginning of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. I want to just maybe focus on three things, if I could, 3 points I wanted to make. The first around land use. Secondly, I want to just mention some of the developments in the offshore energy, offshore wind. And thirdly, with Jim speaking ahead after me, I want to just put a couple of international perspective on where we are on this climate challenge, this credible challenge we have. But maybe first and most, my contribution is going to focus on this land use issue, as is, I think, the programme today, rightly putting centre stage, because that's where it is in our political system, in our media debate at the moment. We're in the middle. I have always said, and I believe it's true, that probably the most important line in our programme for government was the commitment to do a land use review, was to recognise that we really need to think big and long-term and holistically and in an interconnected way about how we using our land and seas. That land use review is halfway through. We've completed the first phase. There was 10 documents, really detailed scientific assessment, 19 recommendations, really good work by the EPA, Chagask and others. I want to thank everyone involved in that. And now we move into the second phase. The second phase, we'll need more science. This is a call to every scientist out there, every academic, every student, every person with an interest, a call to arms, because we need to, while the first review was very useful and with a lot of good analysis done, we've a lot of down to granular detail what type of cover we have in our land, we don't really know in sufficient detail as to what's happening in our land. The ecological situation, what's happening in the systems, the water system, soil system, nitrogen, all the other natural systems. So we need to deepen our knowledge of understanding of what's happening. And doing that, recognizing in a proper scientific way that the science is uncertain. It keeps changing. It's complex. The understanding exactly how our forestry system is storing or otherwise carbon or adding or subtracting from our environmental wealth is difficult. The management or the understanding of soil science is complicated. So that's why we need such further analysis and need to be adaptable. And as you say, Laura, not to going about this as a certain kind of I'm right, you're wrong, divisive approach is not the smart way to go. We'll set up this second phase, both in this more detailed scientific analysis, but also going in a way which we can do well in this country, a partnership approach where we come together to work out how can we optimize the use of our land for a whole variety of changes, of benefits. And the first one is the social benefit. The first one is the future health and well-being of rural Ireland and urban Ireland. Urban Ireland is just in as much need of a green local environment which is rich and diverse and healthy. But for rural Ireland especially, because like agriculture and forestry provide such employment, it's such an important cornerstone of our rural communities, absolutely the first optimization is how do we make sure we have a vibrant, how do we make sure that right across this island you can raise a family on a good income from forestry or farming or protecting wildlife, as well as all the other jobs which will come when we create that optimal use of our land. But it's not just that. There are other services, as you were saying, Laura, like we have to think about where's our forestry system going, and we have to learn from there was huge success in our forestry program, going from 1% to 11%, but we've learned that actually in hindsight, putting our forests up on those peaty soils and upland soils wasn't the clever climate place to put them. Our reliance on a monoculture clear-felling system brings huge risks, losses in biodiversity and impacts on water quality and other factors that we need to change. And I believe Pippa Hackett's new forestry programme, which we're waiting, we need to get clearance quickly from the European Commission, will actually steer us in a very different, better direction. Optimizing the timber we will need for our building stock, where we have to stop using cement and start using wood as the main construction ingredient, so we store carbon rather than expend carbon in our building stock. But also devising a whole range of new forest systems which are rich in biodiversity, which improve our water quality and give an income to farming systems where you can keep farming and do a bit of forestry at the same time is where I see it going. Also, as Minister of Energy, I know that there's huge opportunity for us to provide incomes for farmers. The world's going through a solar revolution in Ireland as elsewhere. It's taking off like an exponent, like a rocket, and it's only starting. Because by the end of this year, we will have introduced new rules that you don't have to go into complex auction systems to get up to a 5 megawatt solar farm introduced. And a lot of farms will be able to introduce those panels in a way that complements their income, reduces their emissions, cuts their fuel bill and their electricity bill. This is a win-win. And similarly, in anaerobic digestion, to use we are a country which has incredible advantage in growing of grass. Grass grows very quickly in this country, a whole range of different grasses. But to use some of that mixed with slurry when we have an excess nutrient problem we have to solve and address, and other waste products give us a gas that we don't have to rely on from a distant source. We have to design that system in a way, as I said, that's not an intensive industrial use of the land, but one that supports family farming, in my mind. Fourthly, of this optimization, and maybe the one that should be the golden rule, is that we reverse the going from 500 pristine river systems down to 20 in my lifetime, and reverse that to bring back pristine water in our rivers and lakes for a whole range of benefits it brings. We cannot continue to trade on an Origin Green brand if we're not truly green in everything we do. The biggest risk to Irish family farming system and to the food industry here is being called out for not actually living out that brand in reality and in practice. It's the same with air quality. The food industry knows this. It's the same with climate and carbon. The food industry, the big companies know this. They're all committed to science-based targets where their emissions, their production emissions, but also their suppliers' emissions count. They've committed to the same climate targets the government has committed to, halving our emissions this decade, going net zero in 2050. And if they don't do that and achieve that in their supply chain as well as in their operations, they know that they will not be able to raise the finance to run their businesses or to be able to trade and get a premium, which we do get, because rightly, we are a country with this really attractive small farming, relatively small family farming type system. That's what I think we can all agree on in protecting. We go into the land use review, in my mind then, looking to agree what we agree on. Trying to agree on some basic first principles that, yeah, we are all agreed. We want a family farming system, not a big contracting, not a big intent. We're not going to compete with the 15,000 cattle in a lot outside Beijing. We're not going to compete with the prairies of Ohio, but we can actually compete as a producer of green food, which also delivers or maintains this island as a beautiful island. What did Joe Biden say? Green energy, green agriculture, green jobs. That's where I think we can sit down in a land use review public engagement and start saying, how do we make this happen and work here? And for those who say the other optimization is the restoration of wildlife, not only have we lost our water quality in the last 40 years, we've lost the natural world, half of it, by invertebrate body mass weight. That has to stop. That has to be reversed. We are all wealthier and healthier and more secure on an island where nature is strong. As Tommy Tiernan said, I'm forever quoting on this one, don't talk to me about nature if the human being isn't centred to it. But also we're connected to it. And that too has to come back. And for those arguing, I hear the views, the scaremongering I'd have to call it, in recent time that, oh, this nature restoration law from Europe is going to destroy our family farming system. I absolutely fundamentally disagree. Are we going to vote for nature destruction law? Is that going to be the future? It doesn't make any sense. It makes sense for us, and we're doing it. We're already starting. Bord-na-Mona has switched from brown to green. Bord-na-Mona is already restored and re-wetted some 13,000 hectares. We have another 20,000 hectares ready to go in the next 2 to 3 years. So we know we can do it. I remember years ago, there was a green agricultural advisor came over from Brussels, and he said something so simple, but it actually really kind of threw me. He says, you're going to need cattle and sheep grazing on these lands. He says, a lot of those peatlands, marginal peatlands you have, if you just let them go, abandoned, what you would see is birch and alder and other holly and other native species would automatically come up in a natural way, but that would drain the peaty soils. That would be bad for the climate. The farmers with the expertise in how we manage that land, so we graze it in a way that we maintain the best soil, the best water levels, the best quality, that cow and that sheep and that farmer is going to be the climate hero because they're storing carbon in how we farm. And I'm absolutely certain that I could go to every one of our main markets around the world, in Germany, Britain, and elsewhere, and say, this is the food that you want to buy because it's part of nature restoration, because it's low carbon in an honest, true, and accurate and scientific way. That's the income, the future income for the Irish family farm. And let's not get distracted. Let's not get divided into a spat over a law in Brussels, which we do need, but which isn't the fearful, in my mind, isn't the threat that some people present it to our farming future. Very briefly, and I'm conscious of time, I want to hear Jim, just briefly on offshore, because as I said earlier on, the science on this is complex and the environmental challenge we have is difficult, because many times we'll face trade-offs that are complex and uncertain in some instances, and you have to take an overall holistic integrated approach. Sometimes do you optimize for wildlife, or sometimes do you optimize for climate, or sometimes do you optimize for water quality? That's a complex equation, and no more so than in the development of offshore wind. I listen with real interest to my UK and German and Dutch and Danish colleagues who are already doing it, and they recognize you cannot completely avoid an impact on the environment as you develop offshore turbines. They're very large. The evidence is uncertain in terms of what exactly the impact is, but there is impacts and risks. And we're going to have to be willing to do some of those trade-offs as we develop our offshore. We have to minimize them, and that's why we're switching towards a plan-led system. So we put environmental planning center stage in first, but we will still have difficult decisions. The first legacy projects, relevant projects that we have are going to be developed in areas that are sensitive. We have to have independent assessment of that in terms of how we make some of those trade-offs. On board Penola and the revision of their legislation is critical for us to be able to make those decisions, assisted by the European Commission and others. We didn't resource on board Penola enough. We are now. Every single job they're looking for, we are providing. We didn't resource the national parks and wildlife enough. We're coming too late in terms of a lot of the designation we should have been doing in the last decade. But we're doing it now in as honest and as urgent a manner as we can. But it will require complex and difficult trade-offs. And the more we see the independence and strength of the board Penola in that process, in my mind, the better. The new legislation is important in revising and upgrading our planning laws. We have to make sure it provides access to the law, upholds the Aarhus Convention. But ultimately, we have to be careful that we don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. And Board Penola has a proud record of independent decision-making. As a state, we are good at sometimes differentiating roles and responsibilities and having independent legal systems so that we make those difficult trade-off decisions in the right way. And I'm confident in Board Penola under the new legislation, but able to do that in a fast and timely manner. And we do need to be fast. The scale of change to meet our climate obligations requires such a leap. There's so many different investments. The EPA needs to be faster, Laura, we were saying ourselves, and resourced to be able to do that, and looking at the legislation to make sure that it can make quick licensing decisions. Because the scale of the change to meet our climate targets is beyond compare. It'll be good for our country, it'll be good for farming, but we do need to be fast. We can't get into a row for the next 5 years and then come to a conclusion as to where we want to go. Lastly, just on an international perspective, I was pleased to meet Jim this morning and have a chat. His proud role as someone who's really led a lot of the scientific assessment and what we need to do in climate. Looking forward to your contribution. As I was saying, on the land use side, one of the men sitting beside you, Brian Carroll, has a key role because I think we're very involved in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which is one of the mechanisms which we can start carrying out some of this scientific analysis on an international level as to how we manage land use emissions. We're centrally involved in that, and we will help support your work, Lacuna Day, in the IPCC to get that best analysis shared and agreed. I also am looking forward to, I'm taking on a role as co-chair of the International Energy Agency this year, going into our 50th anniversary, which will be celebrated in France, in Paris next February. There's one simple message I repeat all the time because I believe it to be true, and it's kind of quite big in its thought, but it's actually, it's very relevant to today. This switch to a low-carbon, renewable, energy-efficient system, which is what it's going to be. Renewables are 85% of the new generation in the world last year. It's only going one way. It is the peace project of our time. It is the ability to avoid wars for energy and the chaos that runaway climate change would bring, it'll work best when it's available and accessible to everyone. Taking a climate justice approach where we make sure that the developing countries of this world have access to the fair finance and fair and secure access to the rare earth minerals and all the other supply chain components we need to make this leap to a solar and wind-powered future will be good not just for the developing countries in tackling poverty, not just in addressing a lot of the migration and other issues which are really challenging in our world, but it'll be good for the developed world. It will avoid breaking down into trade wars between Europe, China, and America. It gives us an opportunity, gives us the platform to make the speed of change we need to make. We have work to do in the international arena to agree some of those rules around how we share and get equitable finance systems. Our government is centrally involved in that. We share a seat on the task force on loss and damage, which has to report back in the UAE at COP28 this year. And I look forward to hearing and seeing what Jim's doing, the work he's doing to help make that fairer climate justice future happen. Thank you.